Hey y'all, thanks for joining us today. I'm Royce Brooks. I'm the Executive Director of Annie's List, and I'm so excited to be here virtually with all of you. Really looking forward to talking with our first panel of Progressive Allies post-session. But first, and for those who may be new to Annie's List, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the work of Annie's List and what it is that we do. Since our founding, Annie's List has elected more than 160 progressive women all across Texas. We've trained thousands more and invested over $20 million to build women's political power in the state. Right now, while we navigate a global pandemic, Annie's List continues to grow and to adapt. And despite the challenges we faced, we made a lot of progress last cycle. We reelected 24 of 25 legislative incumbents. We trained over 450 progressive women and campaign staff, and we had more than 1,800 people tune in to our virtual conversation series and fall events. Because of your dedication and belief in Annie's List, we were able to build on our mission in 2020. We have to continue to do this work because we know how vital it is and what women leaders can bring to the table when given the resources to run and to win. And with every election, we're getting closer to making Texas blue and to reaching gender parity, despite Republicans actively working to suppress our vote. We can't let them silence us. Thankfully, we have some experts with us today who can talk about what happened during the regular legislative session that just wrapped up and what's coming up on the horizon. Our panel includes Claudia Yoli Ferla, the new Executive Director of Move Texas. She's a dedicated community organizer born in Venezuela and raised in El Paso. Drawing on her power and unique experience as a dreamer and a queer Latina, she advocates on behalf of young Texans everywhere, looking to find their voices to affect change in their communities. Becca DeFelice is a mom, a gun violence prevention advocate, a former Texas State Deputy Lead for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. Becca became involved in activism after her daughter's first grade class participated in their first lockdown. Since then, Becca has devoted herself to the safety and security of all Texas children and families, serving first as a San Antonio lead. Leonard Aguilar was the first Latino to be elected as the Secretary Treasurer of the Texas AFL-CIO. He was the Executive Director of the Texas Building and Construction Trades Council and, more recently, was Political Director of the Southwest Pipe Trades Association, representing plumbers, pipe fitters, welders, and HVAC technicians in 3 states. As a longtime member of the United Labor Legislative Committee, which is Labor's lobbying arm in Texas, Aguilar has battled for and against legislation on topics that go well beyond the building trades and capture the aspirations of all working families. Y'all, thank you for being here with us today. And let's get right to it. We have seen the wrap up of one of the most contentious legislative sessions in recent memory. And I would love to just ask each of you, coming out of that session, how are you feeling about where we are right now in Texas? Claudia, let's start with you, please.
Thank you, Royce, and thank you, Annie's List, for all of the work that you do. It's a pleasure to be here today and to share space and be in community with all of you and similarly with our partner organizations, because we know that all of the work that happened this legislative session could not have happened without your energy and your support and your leadership. I'm feeling a little tired, if I'm frank, Royce. I think it was a very rough legislative session. We saw one of the most restrictive legislative sessions that were not only attacking our rights to vote, but also our bodily autonomy, our LGBTQ Texans, our workers. And I am feeling a little bit more hopeful after what happened, how it culminated on the House floor on Friday, particularly on SB 7, but feeling inspired nonetheless by all of the work that was put in. I do think, however, that it's time for some self-care, because I do think that the last couple of months were really rough for a lot of us who were in and day out at the Capitol, but nonetheless feeling hopeful, feeling excited, and feeling ready to continue the fight should a special session come.
Mm-hmm. We'll put a pin in the self-care, because I actually do want to ask y'all about that a little later on in the conversation. But Becca, how are you feeling? You know, you are a gun safety advocate, of course. Texas passed some incredibly irresponsible, dangerous, wild legislation this session dealing with guns. Can you talk more about that and sort of how you're feeling coming out of session and what you think is next?
So I definitely thank you for being included in this conversation and for all the work that you do, because as an organization that is a lot of women, it's a lot of moms. When we go into a legislative office that's another progressive woman, we tend to see that we are respected more, our information is more readily accepted. There's a lot less of the little lady, you don't understand guns conversations happening. But I would say that overall, I second what Claudia said. I think that we're pretty exhausted. And this is something that we've been fighting this legislation since 2017. And we have seen Texas, the legislature, react to a series of mass shootings in our state by loosening gun laws against the opposition of majority of Texans, gun owners, the Catholic bishops, doctors, law enforcement. And to us, that's really the fuel to the fire that we need to get out there and continue organizing, to talk to Texans. And because we're the second largest electorate in the country, and we know that the passage of the Second Amendment sanctuary state and permitless carry means that other states in the South, particularly red states, are going to see this legislation passing more and more in their state houses, it means that it's time for us to hit the ground and really educate the public, especially gun owners, on what this means. So this is kind of where we stand as gun safety advocates in this state. It's a lot of banging our heads against the wall, and it's a lot of just getting out there and trying to refute a lot of the talking points that got pushed out this session.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that work. It's so important. And as we all know, sitting around this table, this virtual table, you know, Texas is the policy lab for the country. And so if people aren't paying attention to Texas, they have to start, because what happens here is coming straight out there one way or another. Leonard, you know, we have seen not only the legislature, but Greg Abbott as governor take just measure after measure that is anti-worker, anti-working families. You know, the decision of the governor to pull back the unemployment benefits for folks, just one among so many anti-working Texan proposals. Tell me how you're feeling coming out of session. You know, what were the top sort of moments for you coming out, and what do you think in terms of what's next.
Well, first off, just want to say thank you. Thank you to Annie's List and to everybody on the call and everybody that's going to be watching. We appreciate the opportunity to let you know where we're coming from as far as labor in the state of Texas. And the biggest thing, I guess, to just kind of be in step with everybody so far is we're all tired. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I think everybody's exhausted. This has been the most difficult session. I think this is my fourth one, maybe my fifth session working at different capacities throughout the past the past few years. But this has definitely been the worst one. And you would think, coming out of two disasters, right? We've gone through a pandemic and we've gone through the winter storm, and all the talk that we heard about coming together as one and working together to try to make things better for all Texans, all working families. You would think that would have carried over from February, because it was just a couple of months ago when we were in the winter storm. And now, to come out of this just third disaster, we've had two. I consider this one a disaster as well. This legislative session has just been a disaster. So you can mark 3 disasters here in the state of Texas in just the last few months. And we're all going to have to pay for that by coming back for specials, or a special, or if not a couple, not depending on the temperament of leadership. But it's something that we're concerned about, we're hopeful about, and we're thankful for all the legislators over there that fought for the working families across the state of Texas, for all those legislators that blocked SB 7, to name one, the big one on Sunday. That was a big one. And there was a lot of SB 14 was another one that was that could have hurt local communities, the opportunity for local communities to take care of their areas and do away with that right. So we're tired, we're anxious to get back, and we're hopeful that we can actually do some positive work coming back in the special moving forward.
Well, the reason that we are bringing together folks from such disparate allied organizations is because we thought that this would be an opportunity to have a conversation about the impacts of the legislative session with a frame of the Annie's List values. I spoke a little bit in my introduction of the program and of our organization about how Annie's List trains and helps to elect progressive women. What does that mean? Progressive, right? And we as an organization have several sort of core values that we talk to our champions about supporting, and that we advocate, and that we look for candidates and elected officials who will fight for. And those are, so sort of disparate that they can incorporate things like gun safety and workers' rights, right? And of course, we know that these aren't in fact separate issues. They're sort of all one issue. But first and foremost for us really is bodily autonomy and access to reproductive care and abortion access specifically, right? We also advocate for access to high quality healthcare across the board, high quality public education, equal pay for equal work, the end of violence against women and children, the inclusion of marginalized Texans in all aspects of public life. And with that, one of the things that really has been so alarming this session are the attacks on voting rights, because that issue and related issues around democracy are so fundamental to everything else that happens. And Claudia I know that MOVE is particularly engaged in the voting rights and voting access space, and especially with young people. Can you talk a bit about SB 7 and how that will impact young Texans in particular, and how y'all are positioning yourselves going forward?
Yeah, thank you so much, Royce. And I really appreciate the conversation around intersectionality, right? Because when we talk about reproductive justice and access to an abortion, we can't really talk about the ability to parent or not parent in the state if we don't have, policies in place that are promoting a democracy, that are not, promoting an environment where workers can thrive and really be successful in their communities, et cetera, and so forth. And we can spend all day, right, talking about how all of our different organizations really intersect with each other and the importance of that work. But specifically SB 7, we knew from day one that this was a bill that was not only anti-democratic, but really an assault fully on our democracy. It was one of the worst assaults that we've seen literally in history here in our state, home state of Texas, since the Jim Crow era. We know that, on Sunday, when Democratic lawmakers stood up, walked out and said that voter suppression has no place in Texas, it meant that it did not have a place today, not any day moving forward. And so we want to thank also, the Democratic leaders who did stand up and fight really for our right to vote and for our democracy. And to me, that was also a very symbolic moment and a very poetic moment of where it wasn't just them standing up against SB 7, but really all of the assaults that we received this session, right? From anti-worker legislation, anti-abortion legislation, anti-pro-gun legislation, and all of the, instead of focusing on the issues, these legislators chose to leave us in the dark, not provide virtual opportunities for participation. And so to me, that moment where these legislators literally played the biggest game of hide and seek ever, was really a moment where they said enough, right? And really stood up for our democracy and our fundamental right to vote. We know that SB 7 would have had a terrible impact on our elections, from limiting, from giving the Secretary of State greater authority over our local elections, to making voting by mail harder and voting purging easier, and to making it even less accessible for voters with disabilities to be able to participate in the process. We know that SB 7, HB 6, and other anti-voting bills would have had a catastrophic impact on our elections. I am so happy, and I know that the moment of the trajectory of us being able to ensure that SB 7 didn't make it, past that finish line, could not have happened without the organizers, particularly the young organizers who were in the Capitol day in and day out, who drove from, all communities across Texas to share their story, wait sometimes 16 hours plus in committee rooms to be able to tell these legislators why this bill is so bad for our democracy. All of that really made a difference. And also some of the actions that we saw take place across the state, not just here at the Capitol. And so I know that moment could not have come, and this one would not have been possible had it not been for those young organizers and the other organizations, TCRP, Texas Freedom Network, and so many others who were involved in this fight. And right now, I think the recent actions, I hope it sends a loud and clear message that young voters, particularly young voters of colors, we're fed up. And what we want is policy solutions. We don't want any more attacks on our democracy. And we will continue to fight back every single step of in the way.
I love that. And I agree with you that seeing not only our legislators fighting this type of legislation, but seeing young organizers, seeing members of the public lifting their voices up has really been one of the bright spots of the legislative session. In terms of other potential bright spots, Becca, was there any legislation? Did any good legislation pass? Was there anything positive that you would like to lift up that came out of the session?
So I will say that one positive is that we did see a lot of positive legislation filed this session. We do have a number of champions in the legislature who are working really hard to make Texas a safer place. Vicki Goodwin, Gina Hinojosa, Terry Meza, they filed some great legislation. Unfortunately, a lot of that tends to stall out. It doesn't get a hearing or it gets left pending in committee. We did see Lion Try passed this session. And essentially what that means is if you lie on a background check to purchase a gun at a federally licensed firearms dealer, you will be prosecuted, or theoretically you will be prosecuted in this state. At this point, I don't know if the funding has been attached to that particular piece of legislation, but it is a step in the right direction. That's one thing that universally gun dealers, gun owners, gun safety advocates all agree on, that if you lie on a background check, you should be prosecuted. And it's shocking to a lot of people that in this state, that was not something that our DPS troopers or local municipalities had the ability to do before this session.
Well, that is some positive movement for sure. And Leonard, same question to you. Was there anything that you'd like to lift up as positive movement this session, or were there proposals that were introduced this session that if they did not pass, that you'd like to see taken up in some future session?
Definitely. There's a lot of things that we would like to see passed, but in the reality, I mean, it's going to be difficult with the representation that's over at the Capitol. But there were a few bright spots that we had, and just looking at our list, I mean, there was a sexual harassment legislation that was filed to help those that have gone through that and having to deal with that. So to hold people accountable and have them liable for doing that. Veteran apprenticeship languages to help go ahead and help our returning veterans, try to get them back into the workforce through our registered apprenticeship programs. Buy American legislation on state-funded projects for some community colleges and things like that. There were some wins. There were far and few between. But again, what we're trying to do is just educate our members and just the public as we're moving forward, because we know we have a big battle ahead of us, and it's going to take all of our groups coming together to try to fend this off and put a stop to this. I mean, what happened this past session again is, I mean, I can't say it enough, and it was bad. It was bad. Just saying it simple. It was bad for everybody out there, and we need to do the best that we can to try to bring in more people into the fold, to educate them, to get more involved and more engaged. A lot more younger people, a lot more older people, a lot just people in general. And it's we're going to be able to do some good things. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but I'm very positive and optimistic with, especially like with the group here that we have with us today. So, small victories, but we'll take them as we're moving along.
Absolutely. And you talk about, the different groups here and kind of what happens next, as we move into the post-session reality, anticipating a special session to be announced. What does the work now look like in terms of these groups and others working together to make sure that these issues are continuing to be uplifted?
Coming to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just again, like I said just a minute ago, we're gonna have to regroup and kind of get some rest, a little bit of rest if we can, and just be ready to return quickly to this and try to get an understanding of what's going to happen. There's so much information coming out and so many rumors that are out there right now. We're not quite sure what direction we're going to have to go and how we're going to be able to base a strategy, I guess, to work this. So it's going to be difficult. The numbers game, just as it is, just again in the Capitol across the street, it's going to be difficult for us. But making sure we can spend a little bit of time with our families, getting ready for this, and just trying to figure out what could be our best opportunities and leverage points that we might have. Again, what happened through this session and everything that went on, and I keep referencing the two disasters that we went through, but and I think Sunday opened a lot of people's eyes. I think a lot of people across the state, with what happened on Sunday, if they weren't paying attention, they're paying attention to it now. And to have the President of the United States reference what's going on here in Texas, that's important. That means a lot, and that's going to open up a lot more eyes, and hopefully that'll help us get a lot more people to get involved in the process. Because when those offices, we all know here, but when those offices get those phone calls or those emails from their district, from their constituents, that's what's going to make the change. That if you can start putting pressure that way. So the more eyes we can get on this, and if we can start, getting our plan together and get an idea of what we have in front of us, I think we can do some good things. It's going to be difficult, but I'm definitely feel positive about what we can do.
I feel positive about what you can do as well. And I really thank you for mentioning, the bottom line, the numbers inside the building, right? When people ask, well, why should I care about what's happening in Texas, right? It is because look what happens when you don't. Right, and look what happens when the numbers are askew, right? These are people's lives and livelihoods and families that are on the line, and the idea that maybe I should be putting my volunteer efforts or my money someplace else where there could be a better return. I don't think that there's a better return than keeping people safe and keeping people healthy and making sure that people can have their voices heard. But y'all have all said you're tired. So let's let's talk about that. How do you take a step back and sort of have some self-care when the stakes feel so incredibly high? Claudia, how do you plan to sort of make sure that you are taking care of yourself during such a hectic moment?
Absolutely, Royce. I think that for me, I've learned really early on that self-care has to be at the center of the work that we do, no matter what, if we want to continue showing up for the fight. And so some of the steps that we're actually taking organizationally at Move Texas to really address self-care, address burnout, and address the fact that, we just had a very hectic couple of years between the pandemic, between a very contested election, an insurrection, a winter storm, a really tough legislative session. It's important for us to really practice self-care. And so what we're doing internally is that we are taking the summer to really pause, look internally at our infrastructure, look internally at our departments, talk about, what is needed so that we can continue to strengthen the ship, and that we're able to really hit the ground running come the fall. And we're also giving staff, and this is something that we kind of came together as a team to really talk about in terms of mental health and promoting mental health internally as an organization. We're doing summer Fridays off. And so really encouraging staff, to really show up Monday through Thursday with all they've got, with all of the energy that we need to continue the fight, but also take the weekend for themselves and for this work and for them to really be able to refuel and come back the next week with more ideas and time to do the work. I think very personally for me, self-care, it means spending time with family. Sometimes it means learning how to say no, maybe to a new initiative, a new request. I think that's really tough for a lot of us in this work that are constantly responding versus being proactive because of the hostile, politics here in Texas. And so learning how to say no is also part of what I'm doing very personally. And I think that it's important for us as leaders in our respective organizations to set that culture, because especially for us at Move Texas, a lot of our staff are young people too, and they deserve to know that, working in a healthy environment also means having time for self-care and time for ourselves, and ensuring that we're not burning out too quickly from the fight, because the road ahead is really long and we need everybody's voices and everybody's energy involved if we want to make change happen.
It's such an important balance to strike. So I really admire the work you're doing organizationally, in addition to personally. Becca, what about you? How are you approaching that question of balancing the work with taking care of yourself as a person and as a mom?
So I think that Claudia hit it on the head, that when you're in this work, when you do this kind of work, you typically are not great at boundaries. We are used to being on call all the time. We're used to doing that, last second drive to Austin, showing up exhausted, sitting in a room for 18 hours kind of work. And so it's hard for us to shift gears, and it's hard to not feel that constant pressure of I could be doing more. For me, my daughter is 11 now. And so we are definitely at that moment where childhood is kind of slipping away and we're moving into that next phase of parenting. So that was the biggest wake up call, because that's a demanding one. You can't ignore that. For me, I think that including her in the work that I do has been the best self-care possible. She comes along to the Capitol. She organized some little actions that are child friendly. And she takes a lot of pride in the activism that she sees in our house. So it's kind of double-edged that I get to spend that time with her, but more so that I get to see kind of a glimpse into the future of what's possible, that through her eyes, equity is totally possible. Fair districts are possible, reasonable gun laws are possible, bodily autonomy is possible, treating workers fairly. All of these things are possible through her eyes. And that kind of hope and optimism, I think, is what keeps us afloat, gives us that reality check that we need. It reminds us of why we're doing the work. And when everything just gets too loud and too chaotic, I go in my backyard and garden obsessively, because like we said, boundaries are not a thing that we're super good at. So everything is full tilt here. So.
That sounds fantastic. And I love hearing that you have another budding activist in your house. There is something really bracing about the way that children don't just see a better world as possible, they expect it, and I love being around that energy when I start to feel overwhelmed by what's happening. Leonard, what about you? How are you taking your break and your self-care?
I really don't know how to do that. I mean, it's like Becca said, it's and Claudia said, I mean, we're kind of wired that way, just to keep going and keep going. And it's difficult. For me, I'll be honest, last night was just being able to get home early, somewhat early. We still waited to make sure everybody gavelled out and got done, but was to just get home and be with the girls and be with the family. And I have to say that and have to give credit to them first, because I wouldn't be in the position I am now and have the opportunities if it wasn't for my wife and girls. So I have to say thank you to them. So thank you guys. But it's just going to be just trying to relax and trying to spend time with them and focus on them, because again, like Becca said, getting to that age, 14, and is the oldest one at home, and then 10, and it's 10 years old, and you miss a lot of stuff, and it's but it's part of the job, and it's what we do. And so just trying to make up time with the girls, and showing them. And I do it, what Becca said, I do a lot of that. I bring them to work with me a lot of times, so they can see and see a lot of the women that are those elected officials now, and so they can see that they can do that as well. So I think that from what we do personally, I guess you could say, is just trying to show them that they have the opportunity and they can do anything that they set their mind to, and showing that. So if I'm not trying to do this at work, I guess I'm trying to show at home, but I definitely need to learn how to take some time, I guess, and learn, maybe I'll take up some gardening or try to do something like that. But as it is right now, it's just being with the family. That's the biggest thing, because that's the most difficult thing for me when I was running around the state, or the 3 states with previous, with the Southwest Pipe Trades. That was the most difficult thing, is just being away from family. So just being able to be with family for me is the biggest thing in the self-care, I guess you could say.
It's a blessing. And especially now that it's becoming safer to gather with each other again, and getting to see family and friends that you might not be, in a household with. Lots of people, didn't have that opportunity for a while. So looking ahead and thinking about what's coming next, if each of you had the chance, and in fact you do have a chance, to say to our viewers one thing that they can do, one action that they can take to make a difference as we move forward, what would you ask them to do? And Claudia, I will start with you.
I love that we're ending this conversation with a call to action. I think that's so important. We can sit here all day long, right, and talk about all the issues and the ways in which Texas could be hostile, but also hopeful in a very same way. But sometimes we need more than words, right? We need action. And so for me, I think that, quite frankly, getting in touch with any of these organizations that are participating in this conversation today, right? If you're really passionate about electing more women into office, contact Annie's List. If you're passionate about young people and really organizing a younger generation, a rising and diverse electorate to participate in politics, contact Move Texas, and the list goes on and on. Reach out to our respective organizations. I'm sure we would be happy to make space for any of you to participate and volunteer. I also think that learning how to share our own experiences and stories. I think every single one of us, come to this work with very diverse backgrounds, different experiences, and the best policy and the best policy solutions, they're shaped based on those experiences, right? And so there's something really empowering, right, about really sharing where you come from, giving your thoughts about policy. And it almost makes this kind of a conversation that is no longer about all of these wonky terms, are really about human life and people and experiences and communities. And so get in touch with one of us. We'd love to help you be a part of the process, and come, a special session or future legislative sessions, being able to share that story in front of legislators is so important. We know that as a state, we're also facing a fight towards redistricting, and it's super important for every single legislator to really hear from their constituents about how redistricting impacts them, right? And we all have a really important story to tell in the process.
Fantastic, thank you. Becca, what would you say to our viewers as a call to action?
I would second what Claudia said. Definitely reach out to one of the organizations here if you have a passion for what we're talking about today. But also, I think that it's really easy for us when we're in this space to say, find an issue, get involved, educate yourselves about what's happening in the legislature. And we don't take into account the fact that not everyone has time for that. It's a little bit of a luxury to be able to obsessively scroll TLO every single night. or to be able to go sit at the Capitol for a hearing. So I think that one thing, I know that the audience for this particular webcast is going to be a very engaged audience. So I would say reach out to your friends who maybe don't have the time, and in a non-aggressive way, share what's happened this session. Explain why this has been the most anti-Texan session in recent history, but do it in a way that makes it accessible, and maybe share some information about contacting their representative and talking about the For the People Act. I'm talking about federal representatives. Right now, we are facing redistricting, and that could set us back a decade in organizing terms and getting people elected that are going to represent the interests of Texans. So it really is so vitally important that the federal government do their part in ensuring that state government is elected in a fair way, that we as citizens are being given that there is weight behind our vote equally. Beyond that, on the very specific mom's note, permitless carry is passing in Texas. We know it's going to pass. And that means that anybody who can purchase a gun can carry in public places. So I would personally urge anyone who's considering carrying at this point without training, without a background check, without that education, to go out and educate yourself about the responsibilities of carrying a handgun in public places before you decide to take that leap.
Thank you for that. Leonard, what's your call to action?
There's so much. I mean, there's so much that I want to say, but I mean, I think Claudia and Becca have really, they've put it out there in some good ways of what we can do and what we need to do. The thing that we have to do is care, just as neighbors, as Texans, just as labor, you know, as just a person that lives in our great state, because this is our state. It doesn't belong to just a certain group of people or a certain party. And this is our state. And I think we need to have that serious conversation of what our state is doing at this time. And it's not for everybody. And it's something that has to be said. And we have to have those difficult conversations. And if that's with your partner at home, or if that's with a coworker, and again, in a respectful way, but just having those conversations and talking about the facts, talking about what is actually happening, having the truth of what's going on, and trying to get more people engaged is the biggest thing, and making it easier. So if it's contacting the different organizations that are here, or if it's contacting just other local community groups that are around in your neighborhood, people are out there and people are wanting to help, and people are wanting to help those that don't know what's going on. So I think just caring about the message and making sure we get the proper message out there is key. And I have enough faith in people that we can make that happen. So that's what I have to add to that.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to close. Leonard, Texas AFL-CIO, Becca, Moms Demand Action, Claudia, Move Texas. Y'all, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you for sharing some inspiration with our viewers. I, for one, am going to heed your calls to action, and I'm also going to maybe try my hand at gardening something. So thank you for joining us this evening. Everyone at home, thank you for joining us as well. And please reach out anytime. Bye.